Now, I am pleased to welcome our speaker for tonight. Our speaker is Jim Mason, and Jim holds a degree in landscape architecture from Iowa State University and has been involved in the Iowa landscape and horticulture industry for over 45 years as a landscape designer and business owner. He's currently an associate professor and chair of the DMACC Horticulture Department in Ankeny. So, thank you, Jim, for being here with us this evening, and I will see everyone at the end of the presentation.
Well, thank you very much. This is pretty exciting. My talk tonight is um, kind of a broad scope. I'm going to cover a lot of ground. I'm going to do it pretty quickly because there's a lot of elements to this topic that um, are detailed as far as construction, things like that, that I don't want to bore anybody too long with that information. And I do want to get to be talking about plants because I know that's what a lot of you are concerned with and such. So, and we all like plants and we're all thinking more about them as this weather continues. Uh, the I got on the slide here a couple examples of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And one of them is terraces. And terrace is a historical word that essentially was tied to architecture way back in the day in Europe and in early architecture, where you would think of a rooftop terrace or a balcony or something like that. But it's made its way in North America down to meaning elevated rooms and such in the landscape. Slopes, I think we're all pretty familiar with. I have two images here. One's from Clear Lake in northern Iowa, a large retaining wall patio step system that none of us would like to tackle on a do-it-yourself basis. And then another one on the right, which is a slope that's just heavily planted with mostly native herbaceous perennials and the like. And these are two extreme examples of um, potential projects that one could get involved in if you were a professional landscaper and such, and maybe would not tackle as a homeowner. But we're going to touch on how both of these come together and how you might be able to use the same techniques that a professional would use, and the process that we follow to make these sustainable uh, projects that won't fall down, and things like that, which is a big deal. We'll talk about that more in a minute. There they are. The one on the left is the large retaining wall and step system on the shores of Clear Lake in northern Iowa, and the other slope garden is at the Blank Performing Arts Center in Indianola, and on Simpson College campus. That was done by Kelly Norris, and Country Landscapes installed this hardscape that you see on the left. And I talked about those, and we'll come back to some of the details on that. But first, let's talk about plants. Just kidding. I'm not talking about plants first. We'll come back to plants. Again, like I said, I know that's what a lot of you want to talk about, but we got a long way to go before we put a plant in the ground when we're talking about terraces and slopes and such. So we'll come back to the coralberry in just a minute. Um, the there's an extreme process to most things that we do in landscaping, especially when we're designing, with tough sites and places that that we've tried and failed other uh, processes to solve a lot of problems. Most of these things that we're talking about are developed, and most landscape designers get called to a site because the homeowner has a problem. There might be that they got water in their basement, or they got water sitting on their patio, or they got all dirt under a tree and no sod, and don't and they've tried a dozen things on their own and it didn't work. And but these two things we're talking about, especially retaining walls and terraces, is a whole nother level, if you will. And and they all contain both of these scenarios, terraces and slopes. Dealing with them contain problems with water and potential things falling over or sliding down, and they're almost engineering problems. And when we reach an engineering problem stage, we turn it over to an engineer, which I'll talk about in a minute. But, you know, if we just talk about what some of these things that you've run into, maybe and you experienced in your own garden or whatever about, working on a slope or even on a terrace, it can be a pretty daunting task. Even climbing up to do some pruning or removing, leaves or whatever it is, it's totally different than working on a flat surface. And like I always say, like I said on this first slide, is that, you know, change of elevation can be a very exciting thing in the landscape and you can do really cool things with it, or it could just be a giant hassle depending where you're at and how long you've been dealing with it. Here's the first thing we need to do, or the first thing I want you to do as part of the process is, and it's pretty darn easy. You can go to your county assessor. Many of you have probably done this before and get an aerial photo, and I don't even care if you don't have the, plot plan or things like that. Just walk around that problem area that you have and just, what I call, you know, listening to the site. Just look at the problem, with a discerning eye, look at it, the way a designer would if somebody showed up at your house and never seen it before, just would they, what would they be doing? And what we would be doing is trying to figure out what the real problem is. A lot of people are really anxious to jump to a solution because they've seen something on YouTube or, you know, saw it down the street or whatever. But as different as we are, so are all of our yards. That no two are the same. There's something different going on at every one of them, and there's no special solution to all these problems. So what we're looking at when we're listening in the garden out there is site features, cultural things, physical things, natural things, both above ground, below ground, just trying to understand our lot and what's going on and what might be leading to that problem. And sooner or later, you're going to figure out your lot's got a little personality to it. Some of it you might have applied to it, by the gardening you've done. Some might be there natively, like if you're on a wood's edge or something like that. And you've heard the phrase sense of place before. That's what this is all about, of saying, what really is going on here? What do I want this place to be? And, you know, at the end of this, we want to identify all the opportunities we have out there to solve the problem and all the constraints. What's going to keep us? I mean, maybe there's no access to the backyard to build a retaining wall to haul tons and tons of stone back there or something like that. So we got to come up with another alternative and things like that. Some of it is intuitive. Some of it's just looking at other solutions, what other people have done, but most of it is just taking the time to do it. And you can do this concurrently with while you're even looking at your sun shade patterns, figuring out what plants you're going to be putting in. You could be making notes on a plot plan all about your lot, get to know it better, and see what's going on. So what are we looking for in the site analysis? Just things that could cause a problem or already did. And I'm going to talk about hydrostatic pressure here. Probably 80 to 90% of retaining wall failures, I'm not saying your wall's going to fall down or anything. I'm just saying what happens in the real world. Uh, we have a lack of respect for water, especially groundwater. And a lot of retaining walls get built in situations where there's so much pressure behind that wall during rain events, or maybe due to slow leaking spring or something like that, or whatever that somebody didn't see, somebody didn't locate, and they built the normal retaining wall, and things just didn't work out. And this can be really damaging. It can be not a big deal, but it could have been avoided. That's the thing, and so if we take a look at this image right here, you know, talking about what we want to use in the analysis, if you look up that slope, the slope doesn't look like much, but there we have this retaining wall down at the end of the slope, and there is a slope up there. In fact, there's two of them. One goes clear back there, and then comes down to a second level and doesn't look too daunting until you get a 1 inch rain and all that water that's hitting on that lawn is flowing down to this retaining wall. And if you get a 4 inch rain, just imagine what can happen then. And you've all probably seen this before, but and this is not a real tough site. This shouldn't be a tough wall build if people paid attention to what was going on. We can actually figure how much water is coming down that slope at any certain time and get a better handle on just what we need to do to build this slope or build this wall so this won't happen. And I'm not going to get into those details. We could do that some other day, about how this wall should have been built and, some of the careless things we do when we're building walls. And, but don't worry, I got some other examples here for you. And the bottom line is, this could have been built so this did not happen. But just think if that was your backyard wall and you went up there, put that wall up, and then you went in and did some landscaping on top of that, and or maybe we're even working up there and then the wall fell. I mean, there's just um, a lot of bad things can happen. So we have the surface water, like that last slide, just water coming down, just on a lawn. But then we have all these other issues that come into play that happen, over the lifetime of the property or after you built your house or things that you added on and you had to add another downspout or things like that. So we have the surface water and then we come in there and we add roof water. We send everything to a downspout, and sometimes it doesn't get there because the gutter's full of leaves and the water's just shooting out onto the patio or into a bed or whatever or on top of a retaining wall. And then we divert that tile. And if we don't know where we're diverting that tile to, as far as how it might affect some other structure in the landscape, or just maybe it's going to the neighbor's yard, which is, you just shouldn't do that. Some people try to. I don't think there's any big law against it, but the neighbor's not going to like it. So all these things have to be figured in. And if you look at the image on the right there, not only are we dealing with water, but we're dealing oftentimes with, cut and fill situations, which I'll talk about more in a minute, where we have unstable soil added behind a wall. You can see here where this wall is so high here, and what they did is they added soil here to create this little swale here so the water would come this way. And that's what it did, but it came in such a volume and so fast that it collapsed this wall, and that could have been a real bad deal there. Somebody was just walking by there at that point. And walls don't necessarily collapse when this happens right when it's raining. They'll get weakened, and then all of a sudden they'll just some of the material will wash out of the back, and either the toe or the top will go first, and then we have a mini disaster on hand. So let's talk about some fun stuff. So when we're talking about beds, either if we want to do some plantings on top of a retaining wall, and we have water up there that we got to take care of, and maybe going clear back to that grassy slope that I showed you earlier, maybe even something like a dry stream bed would have worked on top of that wall to alleviate some of that pressure from going down into that wall and um, causing all those problems. And the other thing about some of these solutions is that something like what we would call a hardscape, maybe of a dry stream bed, or that can actually carry some water if we know what we're doing with it. Maybe it's going into a drain and down through the bottom of the wall. Maybe we're taking it around the side of the house, whatever. Um, but not only do that, aesthetically, dry stream beds, if they're done well and accompanied by a nice planting and things like that, can add a really nice season-long interest feature to your garden. Sometimes we ask plants to do a little bit too much. I don't know, I think I saw somebody from California, so you don't have to worry about what your garden looks like in the winter like we do here, but sometimes just a few, natural elements like stone and things like that, or a bridge or whatever comes along with this water solving problem can add a little detail to the landscape as well. So trying to talk about killing two birds here with one stone, so to speak. How much can we pull off on these gardens when we're dealing at elevations? So let's talk some technical stuff. This really looks, if I put this up on a slide and my students looked at it, they go, oh, it looks like math. I'm out of here. So, um, David McKinney talked about this for you, those of you that were at the Dig One or the Dig Symposium a couple Saturdays ago. He talked about um, conserving water in our yards, in this time of climate change and not knowing what's going on, that the days are over when we should be just sending water that's falling in our yard to another spot, like down the gutter or to the neighbors or down the driveway. And basically, when most houses gets built, that's what the gutter people are told by the builder is get that downspout over by the concrete, get it away from this house. I don't care where it goes after that, and we just keep passing this problem along. But if we look at the bottom, um, well, first we look at this top one. You can see there's a slope coming down here, from right to left. And slope gardening doesn't have to be some giant steep thing that you can't even walk up. It might be that what we're trying to do is just get a part of it level so that we can just work at it comfortably. And to that end, we could do what we call a cut fill situation where we have a slope coming down here. And if you see that, we go down to the bottom drawing, then we have that dashed line that indicates what the existing slope was. But we just take out that soil and throw it up over here at this end, and then all that water that comes down the slope then just hangs out in this rain garden area, what we commonly call a rain garden. And we're not trying to get that water to just go away in a heartbeat. It can just sit there and slowly, you know, percolate into the ground, and we'll be happy. And we'll talk about the uh, potentials of rain gardens, those things in a minute. Now I know this probably looks to a lot of you like, well, I got to go rent a mini skid steer if I'm going to pull this off. And how do I get up that slope and all that? And no, you don't. If you got to do that, you're thinking way too big, and you shouldn't be, tackling the problem to begin with. It's a bigger thing than that. Just keep in mind that we want to store water, and if we can't store it, if we can't store it all, we really want to slow it down. All these water things, like the whole rain garden thing, is based on rules handed down by the federal government, the Clean Water Act, to help control floodwaters in communities. And, you know, we oftentimes get concerned about the government playing big brother and such, but we would not have there's nobody else that could control, our streams and such like the government can, and pass down these edicts that say you need a plan in your city to keep our streams and lakes from eroding, and that's going to hold down your costs for your storm sewers and such. And if you do that, we'll give you money for your new signal lights or your new road or something like that. So they got a pretty heavy hammer there with some of these rules that they pass down. And then if we got a good government locally, they'll pass them on and work with them. And most cities have grants for building rain gardens and kickback programs for, give you $700, put, if you spend 1,500, that type of thing. So this works at any scale. It can be daunting to look at, but here's a picture I found of just somebody doing one. A couple people with a few shovels and a few wheelbarrows and came down. You can look up here to the right. You can see there's a slope down here in this yard coming all the way down here. There's just a shallow area here that collects that water and slows that down. And if this was your yard, you might have this little berm here, and then you might have a sidewalk or something coming along here. Then this would make a nice planting area along top of this berm. If you're not familiar with the word berm, that's just a elevated small mound, typically to control water or circulation or something like that, and makes it easier. You don't have to move a lot, and you're still moving some dirt, but you're just throwing it on top of the little rain garden area you're building. So, um, So when we're talking about building this looks out of place yet, but you never want to look at a picture and say, well, that's weird. But we don't know if they're done yet. Hopefully they're not. I doubt if they are. But we can build that swale. We can plant above it. We can plant below it. We can plant in it with a rain garden. We can plant all around it. So that thing can just basically disappear. It can rain all it wants. It goes into your garden. It might be planted with native perennials or something like that, and all blends into your landscape. So, so we've talked about it. We analyzed our yard. We did all our research on just what the opportunities are, and we come up with this plan. And then we start talking about, okay, um, I think I can do this. Or even if you have a pro do it for you, you can hand that pro some information, let them know that you've done your homework. You've um, through doing that homework, you've deciphered what's really, really important to you, whether it's, keeping the water on site, whether it's using a wide variety of plant material, whether it's, you know, making a slope and turning that into a terrace with a retaining wall. And so these questions come on, and budget always enters into it. The minute you try to do anything in vertical with material in a garden, as in a retaining wall, the prices skyrocket, especially over the last 5 or 6 years. Material, because these items are heavy, and freight is causing a lot of problems, just like it is in landscaping, just like it is in a lot of other entities. And so I'm all for trying to get make these problems go away in a more economical fashion for homeowners. I think our industry for a while has really just thrown material at a lot of problems, and I think we're selling homeowners short that they don't really want to do much maintenance or are tired of climbing up a hill or whatever. And that might be true, but I think part of it is because they've been looking at this problem so long, they're just saying, get that thing fixed. I'm sick of it. Whereas the creative plant solution or something might have been just as helpful. So we got the plan. We are talking about, okay, we're going to hold this slope. We're going to hold some water. What are our options besides, before we just actually get right to the planting, what are we going to cover these areas with? On the left is a option where the slope is basically mulched. There's a little pathway along there that's mulched that goes down to some granite steps here and winds its way up there. Everything's mulched with a pretty good ground cover and plant material coming out of that. And so that covers it. It's going to handle most rains. But what you'll notice in here that this isn't some colored mulch or dyed mulch or anything like that. This is what we call shredded hardwood bark. And there is a difference, folks. I don't want you running out buying your mulch for your garden at the local come and go where they got it bagged up at the gas pump and stuff, like it's firewood or something. It's a lot when we're trying to work on these slopes and keep water from ruining things. We need things that work together. And shredded hardwood bark mulch is basically the oak of like red oaks, or excuse me, the bark of red oak trees, and it's shredded up after post use for, like, if you cut down a red oak to build some furniture at a furniture factory, then um, they'd got to do something with that bark mulch. And to just, you know, to kind of explain it to you, number one, remember we'd never put weed mat under mulch. Do not put weed mat under mulch, especially in a slope situation. There's no friction there to hold it. And plus it defeats the whole purpose of mulch. If you're putting 3 to 4 inches of mulch down, or even 2 to 3 inches, you do not need to put weed barrier under it, or weed mat, whatever you want to call it. You're just paying extra for, no self-respecting weed's going to germinate 3 to 4 inches below the mulch. And then, but more importantly, the weed mat on a slope is not going to hold the mulch. So um, that's one option, the mulch. Now, the other option, and both of these items came on the market, at least in the upper Midwest, about the same time. Back in the good old days, for you that were around we didn't really even have shredded mulch until like the early 70s. Most beds were either going to be like river rock and maybe and they would be there'd be actual plastic under it for you guys that remember that, which had to be real good for the plants, right? And and if it wasn't that, it was just dirt. You'd go out there and weed the darn garden, and didn't want to do that anymore. But so the other option are gravel beds. I hope that most of you, we got a lot of gravel beds information out there these days. The picture on the right here is at Ryman Gardens on their west slope garden there on the west side of the gardens. You can see here, this was a real steep slope back in the day. These retaining walls went up, native Iowa limestone, a circular winding path came down the slope, but and these plants are all in gravel. And I'm not going to get into real detail about gravel gardens or planting in mulch. That's for a whole nother talk. We're big picture stuff here. That's what we're doing. The but the whole essence of the gravel beds is that you have, plus I'm just going to say plus or 5 inches deep of rock or rock chips, and it can be, you know, everybody has their own type of chip they like to use, and but they're going to be pretty small, like no bigger than like 3/4 inch, maybe more like 5/8 or something like that. But you can find the stuff and different colors even. And when you plant for those who aren't familiar, you just push that gravel away and you set the bottom of the root ball right on the soil that's below there. You don't dig it into the soil. You just set it right there. And the beauty of the gravel beds are that they'll take soil, right? Or I mean, excuse me, they'll take water. They got, you got 5 inches of gravel there that you could even run a downspout in there, depending what plants you had in there. That's not across the board type thing. But they'll take some water, and after that first year, after they're established, after that root zone's in there, the amount of watering you need to do is really cut back. And you can't always say that about mulch. Mulch is going to keep a garden, the root zone cooler. It's going to hold the moisture, that type of thing. But also, malt decomposes, right? And sometimes everybody wants to add another inch, each spring to make it look fresh and all that good stuff. That's up to you. But you don't have that issue with gravel beds. That you can just plant right into them and cut them back in the fall or spring, whatever you do, and whenever you want to, and then they just shoot right back up through that gravel. And so if you're not familiar with that, look into the gravel thing, because that combined with what we're talking about here with slopes and retaining walls, it's kind of a neat option. Because if like just take this Ryman Gardens path right here, you can see the gravel right up to the top of the walk there. And if we had to continually add mulch, or if they had to continually add mulch to that bed, uh, it would be just washing over the edge of this sidewalk and stuff. So both of these um, products, both of these opportunities bring different things to the table, but they're each long-term solutions, if you ask me, if they're done right. So that's kind of the overview of some of the philosophies on you don't want to mess with water. You need to figure it out just what's happening in these areas on the slopes and behind walls, because they can fail if they're not done right. And then just what we're going to plant them in. And then we need to talk about a little bit about, what type of plants do we use on these slopes or the terraces and the like. So let's just bounce into that real quick here. All right. I'm a native plant guy, have been ever since I was taught by, Bill Boone was one of my instructors back in the day at Iowa State University. Some of you people might know Bill. Um, and he and one of my classmates, Harlan Groh, put this book together, Nature's Heartland, around 1990. I should double check that. But you guys have your favorite plants. We all have our favorite plants. And some of those plants you use as specimens, others you use as drifts. Drifts is what I call a collection of the same plants in a nice, I just love the word drift. It just rolls right off my tongue. So I like to see plants, and especially when we're doing, we may have a slope that we want to do something besides lawn at, and it doesn't have to be. If we flash back to the Kelly Norris image at the Simpson College there, there's some drifts in there, but there's all different ways we can handle these plants, especially when we're dealing with herbaceous perennials, not so much with woody stuff, but I'll show you examples of both here. Um, so, but you all have your own notion, and then I'm going to step back to that whole analysis thing that what's your slope or terrace telling you about how they want to be handled? And some of this, I keep harping on this, but this is a big bugaboo of mine. I tell my students, I tell almost everybody I know, they get sick of hearing it. I just can't believe that, like say if you folks were going to go paint your dining room, they said, hey, we need a new color in our dining room. Most of us, because I'm guilty of it too, most of us would make 5 trips to the Lowe's, or to the paint store or whatever, picking out chips, going home, putting it on the wall a little bit, sitting there looking at it, and watching it dry, make sure what color it was, and oh, don't like that one, that's too dark. Run back to the paint store, get another one. This could go on months, trying to figure out what color to paint a room. But what do we do as plants people? We'll run out to the garden center, see something we've never seen before. We'll pay $25 for that, take it home, slam it in the yard, and not even think about it. And I think we need to step back a little bit um, and I'm talking to a lot of the maybe not as experienced gardeners here because a lot of the others have been around a while, know what you like. But I think, a lot we don't want to discourage people. Because if you buy a plant and it's not right for your site, right plant, right place, we all have heard that saying. If it's not right, you're just going to get disgruntled, and I don't want that to happen to anybody, and our industry shouldn't want that to happen. So we look for inspiration in all sorts of places, and a hike through the woods, a hike through the prairie, a hike through the garden center, a hike through the cemetery, a hike through the, we're checking out gardens everywhere we go. We listen to webinars. We get, you know, more information than we've ever had about picking out plants, but they're plants. They're living things. Every one of them's not going to survive. Every one of them's not going to do exactly what it looked like on the, screen when you ordered it or whatever. So sometimes it's good to just step back and say, where did we come from? What's this sense of place thing? And sense of place, just for those of you like in, I'm going to just go back to the Ryman Gardens and talk to you about this is native Iowa limestone. Almost every building and landscape in Ryman Gardens is made out of has some element of native Iowa limestone. That offers a sense of place. That means we didn't ship it in, or they didn't ship it in, but we as Iowans can start recognizing that that's Iowa stone, darn it. I want some of that in my yard. Well, we want the same thing with plants sometimes. Now, I'm not a purist on any of this stuff. I'll do what's best for the customer generally, and unless I really don't like it. The but if we talk about Nature's Heartland book, and this isn't the only book out there, this book is organized according to the plant's natural habitats. And on that list, on each of these sections of it, the sections based on our ecosystems here in Iowa, the oak savanna, the maple linden forest, the oak hickory woods, the wetland prairie, the dry prairie, with all the plants, not all the plants, but enough to build a landscape around. and create a natural setting if that's what you're looking for. I'm not here talking about trying to talk into these plants. I'm just trying to get you to think about um, plant selection. What you're going to go through all this work, you're not going to want to climb back up on that slope or retaining wall terrace and such and start having to remove and replace plants. So let's get it right the first time. Most of these plants that I'll talk about, you're going to see available these days, a cultivar of this plant. And it's getting to the point here that, in a lot of instances, that might be the best way to go. Not all the time, but that's for you to decide. So let's just look at something. We're back to our buddy, the coral berry, excuse me, that I showed you way back there in the second slide. This is, you know, one of the classic plants, when I have this discussion with people that, because a lot of people have probably heard of coralberry or they got it mixed up with coral bell. But coralberry, Indian currant coralberry, is a native plant to Iowa and a lot of the Great Plains areas and to the east. Um, it grows in shade. It has this, and if those of you that walked around the woods, or I'll say on the prairie and the prairie's edge, it'll take shade, but not full shade. And you'll see it like this picture in the upper right. This is on the edge of a prairie here in central Iowa. And there's some of it up in the ledges along the prairie, some of those areas, Ledges State Park by Boone. And but it's part of the Oak Savannah community. And what I'm talking about here, again, this sense of place thing, is that just how easy could it be to just say, I got sun, I got partial shade, I have a little slope I'd like to cover, I would like some berries for the birds, I want year-round interest, I want low care, you know, there's no such thing as no care, so we're going to go with low care and something that feeds the birds, all these type of things. Well, doggone it, we got a plant that's native, that will do all that and cover like a ground cover. I use it, it's a shrubby ground cover, only gets like 2 feet tall or so. Comes out with these little pinky white flowers, really um, late spring kind of, and then the berries linger through the fall, clear into the winter, and can make a nice slope cover. Okay, so I go back to that Nature's Heartland book, and so that's my 2 foot high plant. And I sit here and go, oh, geez, I want to screen that neighbor's RV over there. I got built this nice terrace, and doggone it, I can still see that thing. Maybe I need something that's 6 to 12 feet tall. Well, in this same plant list, the oak savanna is smooth sumac, and a lot of people are familiar with sumac. We have this tendency in Iowa. Well, that stuff grows in the ditch. Well, if it grows in the ditch, it must not be any good. And but little do they realize that this plant's been around for like 8,000 years, or whenever the glacier last went through. And so we're staying in that same community, and we're building this little plant community as we, you know, think about our sense of place, and maybe we build our new terrace out of native stone, and maybe the steps to it are native stone or whatever. And we're starting to put things together that I really feel comfortable with. And same deal with this plant. Is it everybody's favorite? No. Do you need a whole football size field of it? No. It'll work in landscapes and it adds color basically year round and interest for sure year round and all these plants, just because they're oak savanna type plants, are going to take some wet feet a little bit. They're not going to take standing water. But on the other hand, if you do want a large drift of it, as those of you that are familiar with it know, it can get pretty large as if you let it just, you know, go away, out there. You can cut it back and all that good stuff, but that's the image it has. But look at this beauty. This is one of my favorite plants. Most of you around the Midwest have probably heard of the American plum. Some people just call it the native plum. First thing to bloom in the spring. You can see this picture down here. with the plum flowers, pure white flowers, just almost flowering dogwood white. And you can see in this upper picture, it's sitting here on a wood's edge situation, almost a shady yard. A lot of tree trunks in the background here. This is an Iowa picture here. And these are along old railroad beds. A lot of our native woods, you'll find them. And I don't know if you can find a better plant that's 12 to 25 foot tall. I got a few I could probably throw in there with it, but for early spring color to really say, it's kind of like the forsythia saying spring's here, but just a pure white flower. The neat thing, they just have a tremendous um, all season interest. Really lush foliage in the summer and the late summer, the plums start coming on. Then you get those fruity plums that, I've put these in several landscapes that I've lived at, and uh, the surrounding kids and the surrounding squirrels. I didn't know the squirrels' names, but I knew most of the kids' names, and just all over this plant when the plums start doing their thing. And you can form a drift of these. My favorite word, the drift, like a drift of sumac, a drift of plum. If you got the space, can really add interest and get you feeling better about the landscape at a woody plant level. These are woody plants that are native to our oak savanna area. And then we can take a few minutes and start talking about what about the herbaceous things? What else? These, what I got here, 3, 7, 9 images right here. All these plants are native to the oak savanna and are used in our landscapes to some level. They're readily available, is what I'm trying to say. They're not like this is something where you got to go out at midnight and dig one out of the prairie to if you really wanted it. These are plants that are available, and again, a lot of these have cultivars that people use nowadays. That if you go down here to the Culver's root down on this one on the lower level, second from the right, you see a lot of cultivars out there that have real dark stems and almost black leaves on it. But if you've never seen a drift of Culver's roots in the native setting, um, it's something to behold. When it blows my mind every time I see it. And it's again, these are going to be sun plants. All right, these all if any shade hits these plants at all, you're going to be in trouble. Let's just run through them real quick. We got the big blue stem, can get like 6 to 9 feet tall if you let it, you know, but you're going to let it if you plant it. And there's a lot of cultivars of big blue stem. The New England aster, just who would not want this? Everybody seems to be mum crazy. You can plant New England asters in your garden and you never have to buy a mum again if you want some color in the fall, and sawtooth sunflower, just a really cool plant. It's right up there with some of the others, tall yellow flowering um, plants. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And pure prairie blazing star. Here's a giant field of it down in Kansas, and just a wonderful plant. Just will just thicken up on you, and all these plants you can't call them invasive, but what happens in these gardens, and the reason we plant them like we do, just very naturally, because the strongest are going to take over unless you do some maintenance of your own, like digging things out. And that's kind of the way it should be, but it doesn't have to be. But if you don't want to do that work, find somebody that will. But even in small rain gardens or things, if you're using these plants, all these plants are happier if they're burned, right? The old prairies got burned maybe once or twice a year. The prairie was struck by lightning, or the Native Americans would set it on fire to keep the snakes away from their villages and things, all these stories. And so I contend, and they're not going to let you burn in most cities, right? Or towns or neighborhoods. But I bet they wouldn't really holler if you just cut them all back. If you want to cut grasses back, I always tell people to take a bungee cord and wrap it around the thing and then just cut it off the base and it doesn't go flying all over the place on you. Take a torch, Go out there, burn the remnants of that off, and you'll just have this black stump through the winter or spring if you do it in the spring. And it's all doable. It's just a matter of priorities, right? It's kind of like that paint chip you've been chasing all over for 3 weeks. They got the purple prairie clover and the compass plant. Some of these plants, the compass plant has that huge leaf. So the texture of this plant is just as important as the flower. Culver's root, already talked about that. Gray-headed coneflower, one of the underrated coneflowers, in my opinion. And then let's just talk about shade a little bit. Same thing. If we go to this book or you go research it a little bit, well, what native plants can I use in my garden that'll help me with slopes or absorb some water and give me my sense of place still? This plant here, fragrant sumac, the cultivars that grow low is what it's called. We have fragrant sumac is native to our woodlands. But what we've done is we've taken it out of the woodlands and we've hybridized it so it will take more sun, and we sell it in the trade as grow low sumac, and we tell customers it will get like 2 to 4 feet tall, which it will do in the shade. But if it's in the shade, it's not going to get this bright orange red fall color. But if you put it in the sun, that thing's going to want to get, I've seen them 6 to 8 foot tall, which is just too bad because clients don't know what to do with them then. But if you take care of it, the point is that we have plants that we can cover a slope with. And another one's snowberry, um, which is a cousin to the coralberry, which I talked about earlier. It just has white berries, but it'll grow like the coralberry. But the berries really don't get eaten by. I've seen rabbits chewing on these things this winter. That was weird, but birds don't eat them. But it grows by stolons too. It'll just drop its twigs down and whatever, and more or less, crawl across the ground and form a thicket. And then I'm going to end up on one of my favorite plants here, the serviceberry, which is a native, you know, part shade. We'll call it the savanna plant, maybe because it's where the prairies meet in the woods, but year-round highlights. A white flower, early spring, same time kind of as the plum. It's always a race to see who's going to bloom first. Not as pure white as plum. Fall color, it's going to usually be more yellow and orange than red. More red if it's out in full sun, but it has berries that come on in the summer that um, the cedar waxwings and all the other birds flying around will be all over those guys. And so, quick review. You got to analyze your site. You got to figure out really what the problem is. If you're going to spend an hour on it, spend 55 minutes figuring out the problem and then 5 minutes figuring out the solution. And after you get that analyzed and such, start figuring out the material. Am I going to mulch it? Am I going to use a gravel bed? Um, and then you start figuring out the plants. And all this can be done concurrently. You can be out looking at plants while you're out looking at landscape material and such. So that's all I got. And happy spring, Master Gardeners.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jim. That was a wonderful presentation. We did have one question about if you can share the name of that book again.
Nature's Heartland.
Nature's Heartland.
I
All
can pull it
right.
up here. You still got my screen?
Yeah, that would be great.
You can buy it used. It's not in print anymore, but I think a lot of people would get a big kick out of just seeing what plants are native here that we should be using in the landscape laid out so you can understand it.
Okay. One question, you talked about how we're not going to add any weed mat under the gravel if we're using a gravel mulch on a hillside. But what about if it was in a creek bed? Would we want to add any weed
Yes.
mat under
You can
that?
use it in a creek bed. You would anytime you're using hard mulch like river gravel, Wisconsin trap rock, brick chips, you're going to use weed barrier, just not under organic mulch.
Okay. And I know some people are really interested in that American plum. And I will say now that I know where the American plum is on campus, on Iowa State's
Yeah.
campus, I will be visiting it first thing this spring. But a few questions about that is, does it sucker and is it self-pollinating?
It's self-pollinating and it does sucker, but that's the great thing about it. I mean, that's, when you're thinking about these things, just go back to, like we all complain about invasives in our woods and things like that, and and all that stuff is going on, and and that's important stuff. But in your yard, you can create what that woods might have looked like 150 years ago before us white people got out here and started messing with everything. And that's all I'm talking about is that whole sense of place thing, that these plants can do wonders to help us our mindset in that.
Okay. And a few common questions that I hear people ask and that were asked here today. One is someone wants to divert the water from their downspout into a garden, specifically a downhill garden. What's the best way for them to get from the end of that pipe into a nice flow into that downhill garden?
Well, you'll see a lot of people burying downspouts, and to me, that's my last resort typically. And because in Iowa, we have two culprits. We got burrowing rodents. Well, most places got burrowing rodents, and we have ice jams. And if that pipe gets plugged anyway and it's underground, you're going to be in big trouble. I like to keep water where I can see it, and so that's where the dry stream bed can come in play, where that downspout could empty right into the dry stream bed and roll right down above the surface to the um, rain garden. But we're getting better at it. There's other tools out there about rain harvesting and things like that that have different, uh, now we have these baskets that can clean out the water, that filter the water that go into this container, and then you can see that the downspout's working, and you can clean out that stuff, and then put it in a pipe or whatever. There's there's a lot of options out there, but whenever possible, leave it where you can see it.
Okay, great information. And then one other very common question. Someone has a hillside they want to put something on as a spreading ground cover, and they don't want to have to mow it. What would we suggest for that?
Sun or shade? That's always the
They didn't
first question.
say.
Yeah,
They did
that's
say
always the
that it has
first.
a wet
We'll assume it
area.
that it's sun. All right. And I, the first thing I tell people, unless they, everybody's aesthetics is different, right? Because depending where it's at, depending on what's been there before, one option is just to stop mowing it and see what happens on its own. A lot of our seed mixes have, they've already been taken over by a couple of the main seeds in there as far as the grass is concerned, and it might just turn to all fescue. And you only have to mow it like 2 times a year if you wanted to. But the next step, it's just not that easy. Um, you go in there, do you strip that sod with a sod cutter? Nobody's going to do that on a slope. Well, somebody gets paid $100 an hour might, but um, the you're going to round up it and then till it. The word roundup most of us don't like, and so it's not easy. The other thing to do would be to leave the sod, go in there, cut some bigger holes out of the sod, and plant something like the coralberry, plant some other creeping thing that would just take over and just basically drown out that sod with a little bit of clipping, in between there. It's because you don't want it eroding on you while you're doing the work.